All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Oh, we went weird there. All right, thanks for dialing in today. Today I have. You won't believe who I have on the phone with me today. Or we're going to be talking with Scott Sewell. We're going to be going into Dataverse. We're going to be talking Synapse Link. We're going to be talking Power BI. I can't wait to get into it. Let's not waste any more time. Alliance is counting on you. Like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, turn on that alarm bell so you don't miss any future mission. All right, but before we bring up Scott, I do want to just put a little plug. I'm trying to get live streams going every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Next week, I'm talking with Gopi at InfoRiver, so make sure you subscribe to the channel, set on your alarm bell so you don't miss that one as well. All right, let's see about Scott. Haha, there's Scott.
Hey!
How's it going, Scott?
It's going good. It's nice. Good
Yeah?
to see you again, Chris.
Oh, good seeing you too, buddy. So one of the biggest things that we've been looking at internally is, we've got a lot of people that use Dataverse in all of our Power Apps and Power Automate. We've got people that are using Dynamics, right? And they've got all this data that's really inside of Dataverse, right? And then they want to do analytics on this. They want to start to do more things with this. And, Microsoft has come out with a number of solutions and I wanted to have a conversation with you so we could start to dig into that. And, before we go too deep into this, you want to just give us a quick rundown on what is Dataverse and where does this play in the schema? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny because Dataverse, I live and breathe Dataverse all day long. But the funny thing is, nobody, like a normal user, is never going to sit down and go, let me log into Dataverse. It's really that's that kind of underneath the surface layer of data and platform management, security layering, even some automation and things like that are in that layer of data that sits underneath, like you mentioned, Dynamics 365, specifically the customer engagement / CRM product, or Power Apps. So you've probably seen a lot of model-driven Power Apps and maybe some of the Canvas-driven Power Apps. Those are also like the front end that people will see, but the back end of that is storing data in that layer called Dataverse. So it's even though I live and breathe Dataverse, a lot of people are using it, but they don't even realize they're using it. But that's what Dataverse is. It's kind of this really business application driven layer of being able to capture and process and hold on to data, as well as secure it, organize it. It's not a database,
okay,
per se.
Mm-hmm.
It's an easy thing to think about because it's really like a managed data layer that sits over top of a database.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So can you tell me, is the underlying, is it SQL Server underneath all of that, or what's the guts behind it?
Most of it is sitting inside of SQL, inside of Azure SQL, underneath the way down under the layers of application is sitting there. Some of it's sitting in stored in Azure in a data lake.
Okay.
And some of the logging things are stored outside of Azure SQL, but the bulk of it's sitting in Azure SQL as a layer way down below the surface. But the part of the fact that it's a managed service is you don't have direct access to that data layer. That's sort of the database down at the raw form.
Sure.
Anytime you're interacting with it, it's going to take that request from you and say, okay, Chris, what would you like to see? And you say, okay, I want to see all the sales opportunities. And they go, oh, wait, Chris, you're in the Wisconsin region, so we're only going to show you the opportunities that you're allowed to see. So it's got these layers in it that protect the data and kind of partition the data according to rules inside of that are configured inside of Dataverse. So it's a pretty powerful layer like that as if I was going to build this on top of like on SQL, I would have to go through a lot of creation of that to do that. Whereas you get that all built into the Dataverse engine. So yeah, it's a fun thing to deal with. It actually lowers the barrier of entry for people to get started on capturing data in a business application like a an internal application, whether it be for a dozen people in a department or 10,000 people across an enterprise, for people using Dataverse for that, even when they don't know it.
Well, that's fantastic, and so you got a few things that I'd like to drill in on what you said there.
Yeah.
So you're telling me if I have row level security built into Dataverse, I don't have to be worried about anyone who builds an app out on top of that Dataverse, that they're going to have access to anything that they shouldn't have access to. Is that right?
That's correct. The data is being protected there. When you log in or authenticate to Dataverse, whether you're coming through a Canvas-driven app or for a model-driven app, or even if you're just pointing Power BI directly at it, if you're logging in, it says, "Who are you?" Check your authentication. Then it checks your user inside of Dataverse and finds out what roles do you have, what permissions have been shared with you. There's like this huge matrix of reasons as to how you would have permission to see a particular record within it, but that's all part of that layer in there.
Oh, that's fascinating. So that's that's great. I like that it's secured. I can feel comfortable that if someone is building something, they're not accidentally giving access to stuff that they don't have. Talk to me more about how does my little Power app that's using Dataverse, that's the same technology that a globally scaled Dynamics environment is in. So the app I build in Power Apps can scale to an entire enterprise?
Entirely, absolutely, and do it, and we see it every day. So
Wow.
it's set up and it's architected as any enterprise application should be for scalability. The nice thing is it's also architected so it's easy to run as a small scale. Even you can run it inside of Microsoft Teams. So there's even Teams channel versions of these apps that you can run kind of on a more limited version of it. So it's built that way. So there's the fun thing is if you and I are sitting down, you and I both know SQL. We know how to build a table and create columns. But that's straightforward. We can write a query against that. That's no problem. But then you start saying, okay, well, I need to set it up so it's globally, it's accessible globally. I need authentication. I need auditing, logging, and I need all sorts of integration back to AD for permissioning. It starts getting to be a lot more than you want to tackle. But by spinning it up for like a Power App inside your organization, you get all that sort of for free off the platform.
Well,
that's really
that's fantastic, because I know one of the things I struggled with was classically 20 years ago when I entered IT. There are all these apps that were built in Access, and then it became a critical part of the organization, and you're like, oh my gosh. And Cheryl, I love you. You built a great Access app, but it took a lot to really, when Cheryl decided to retire, and if you're out there, Cheryl, watching, hi, to make that part of the enterprise. It's exciting to hear that Power Apps has that scalability and enterprise view on it. So
it was. The nice thing it was built for scalability, and it works as a smaller app. I've got an app right now we were using in the team that I'm on, and there's probably maybe 30 people that use it and hammer on it all the day long. And it's, and that's a small group, but we have access to the full platform as a result of it. But it's cool. But, most of my work now has been, I grew up on that platform. I started in 2003 working on the first version of Dynamics CRM, which kind of is the precursor to this. Built on that, started seeing it grow, and started seeing how we could adapt to a lot of different processes and whatnot. But over that time, I kept finding, we're putting a lot of effort into capturing and updating and grinding this data. But the real value is when you get it and start summarizing it out into a reporting perspective. And for the first versions of CRM, we had Crystal reports. That was it. Crystal reports. And that was painful. And then we got gradually we got over SSRS, so we could write that. And I got pretty good at writing SSRS reports, but still those are the paginated kind of reports and not real, you could put some graphs in it, but weren't real exciting graphs or anything. But at one point of several years ago, somebody said, hey, you ought to look at this Power Query. And then I think they're going to bring it out as Power BI, and take a look at that. It was like, boom, that is awesome.
Well,
and so that's been a fun transition for me.
That's a great lead into my next question, and we have a number of people that have, we're using Dataverse, and they really are happy with how it interacts with their Power Apps, but when it comes to their Power BI, right, they've pointed at their Power BI right at Dataverse, and now we start to run into performance issues, especially when we get into enterprise scale. Can you talk to like how do you guide people on this? What's your words of advice for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's kind of the first question that a lot of people go. First thing is, well, why is it so slow? But the reality is, the nice thing is we have these different options on how we deal with the data, and each option has its own sort of distinct use case and advantage. And the mistake is really saying one use case is supposed to solve everybody's challenge. Like you and I have talked about before, if you're working in this scenario with the security modeling, we have the ability with Power BI to connect directly to Dataverse, coming through that security layer. And so if I build a report for the salespeople in Oshkosh, and the salespeople in Oshkosh in Dataverse have been only have permission to see their opportunities. They only and there may be opportunities from around the world, but the ones in Oshkosh can only see theirs.
Right.
When I point a Power BI report to that and use direct query, it will filter that data so that all they can get in Power BI is the data they are permission to see. And as soon as somebody clicks, give them Oshkosh and Madison and Milwaukee, then suddenly the next time they open their Power BI report, it's going to have a little bit more data. So it really just inherits that security from Dataverse in that case. But obviously there's a trade-off. One side you inherit the row-level security from the application, so the application is controlling that, and Power BI just says, you just tell me what you want to see, I'll give that to you. That's useful. The downside is that processing takes time, it's slower. I mean, even direct query outside of Dataverse, there's a perception challenge when you open a report and the report has no data in it, because a direct query report is empty until you open it, and then it goes and asks for the data.
Right.
So there's like nothing cached in there or anything. So there's immediately a perception challenge of that, because people are kind of assume that you open a report and there's something there. In this case, there's nothing there until after you've opened the report. So that's a perception shift there, is to understand what that use case is. Moving forward from that, if we're talking about a medium-sized data set, a small data set of, we'll call it 100,000 records, just as a round number. There's no magic number, but you're talking about 100,000 records, and the people who need to see this already have permission to see the data. There are, there's not like, we don't have like weird partitioning set up inside of Dataverse. Then you just export the data. You can use the import mode, pull it into Power BI, and boom, the data is right there in front of you. Now that's still an example where we're pointing Power BI directly to Dataverse. One case we're doing direct query. The second case we're doing import mode.
Right.
And in that import mode, okay, you just do a refresh Power often, pull the data in inside of Power BI. It's cool. It's there. It's happy. It's snappy. We're good. Now, moving on. That's kind of still in that medium size data set. Then you move up into the enterprise data set. So I was working with an organization, National Financial Services Organization, and they had these really, really strict rules about what each salesperson could see. In fact, each salesperson could only see, it was like they had really tight blinders on, so they could only see the deals they were working on.
Sure.
And so direct query is the right way to do that. But we move up and said, you know what? But also the sales vice presidents and the CEO, they have permission to see everything anyway. There's no need to filter the data.
Right.
Let's go ahead and pull it out. But we got to pull millions of records out of this data set because we want to look back 3 years and see gobs and gobs and gobs of data. In that case, we went with an approach where we said Dataverse will synchronize over to a data lake, and we can use that, and so Dataverse has a mechanism to automatically and continuously synchronize the data from Dataverse into the data lake, and then we can put Synapse servers in front of that as a serverless SQL on top of it, and query the data that way.
Oh, so that's
it allows
interesting.
me.
So you're able to sync this into a data lake and then take advantage of a scalable compute layer to be able to bring that live data out to our consumers in either near real time or in a cached scenario, right?
Right. So yeah, it's a at that point you're moving all the way up into the grand scale of millions of records or whatever, and so that lake is being continually written to as changes are taking place inside of Dataverse. You don't have to set up any jobs. You don't have to set up any. You basically just say, this is the lake. Here's the subscription. Here's the tables I want synchronized, and go, and it starts. So very, very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been on the analytics side of CRM for a long time, and we've been using a thing called the data extract service, or the DES. And I understand, okay, so that's going away, and so now we're going to the Synapse link. But and you're saying that this is the tool and the mechanism that you go from, okay, hey, it's syncing into a SQL server, but now I have access to a cloud scale solution that's configurable in the same way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. In fact, you bring up the DES, the older data export service. That was a precursor to the Synapse link.
Right.
That was a tool. That was a configuration that was set up. I don't know how many years ago has it been. Do you know? It's like 5 or 6,
6, maybe even 7.
Maybe even 7. Yeah. So it's been out there for a while, and that older service would continuously read make changes from data in Dataverse. They would be synchronized out to a Azure SQL database. And that Azure SQL database, you had to scale it up and have it running at a certain performance level so that the reads, or the writes wouldn't fall off if it ran into contention error. But if you had a sufficiently big bank account or PO and a nice size server sitting out there, it would write to that. Challenge was it's not a really cost-effective way of doing that. The more cost-effective way is to say, let's write all that out because we're trying to store lots and lots and lots of data. Let's write it to the data lake, cheap storage. That sits in the data lake, and then we could put Azure Synapse serverless on top of it, which gives us a SQL footprint that we can SQL UI or endpoint that I can query, and it will query what's in the lake, and I only pay for it when I need it. So if I'm refreshing my data set once a day, or twice a day, or 10 times a day, I'm only paying for it at that rate. Otherwise, it's sitting there quietly twiddling its fingers and not charging you anything.
Well, that's great. So you're saying that the Synapse link takes us from is that like cloud modernization journey for the solution that we have for Microsoft. So no longer the on-prem SQL server to a cloud scale solution. So I have access to a data lake, so I can, and then I use Synapse Link for my analytics. But that also means, and correct me if I'm wrong, can I now put APIs that sit on top of my lake to like power my other automation and other stuff, so I don't even have to run it through Synapse Link?
Yeah. So I guess you could put a automation inside if you wanted to write, build it yourself. But in this case, it's really kind of like, I struggle with trying to find a use case as to why you would want to build it a replacement for this, separate from it. What you might do, a lot of times people are using this now to say, okay, just let Dataverse write it to the cloud, write it out to the lake. Boom, it's out there. Put Synapse in front of it for the SQL. But we're also going to set up some SQL pipeline, Synapse pipelines to either move the data into other systems from there, or we might set up use the AI tools that are built into Synapse, the machine learning tools that are built into Synapse that can then go out and possibly reach out to other systems, enrich the data, and then use that to push it back into Dataverse. So I've seen customer cases where customers will take the data, land it in the lake and Synapse in front of it, enrich it, push it back into the system, into Dataverse, so it's available to an end user to be able to, for their whatever the processing is.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So we're seeing a lot of that.
I guess, yeah, that was exactly where I was going. Like, okay, I now have a lake where I can now do all of the things that we want to do with the lake, be it, data science, APIs, scalable, whatever we're going to do on this for like enriching the data or downstream triggering of activities for our sales force or whatever that happens to be, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
it really unlocks a lot of opportunity. In fact, the first version of it, you start seeing it, you go, okay, well, that's just a replication engine. It just drops it out there and I can query it, and then I can run my Power BI off of that. Okay. That's we'll get that done this afternoon.
right.
That's easy.
Yeah.
Now let's take it another stage and let's put our, we can run AI and Spark and all the other amazing things that come under Synapse, and enrich the data, gain deeper insights on it, push that back into Power BI, whatever, you get people that are a lot smarter than me to create some amazing solutions with that.
Sure.
It's cool.
Oh, that's incredible. So when it comes to setting this up and getting Dataverse into Synapse, and we think about the skill level and the time it takes to implement, are we talking about we need a senior engineer who's been doing this for 10, 15 years? Do we have to go to that level, or what level of skill set is it necessary to set this up and to maintain this in an ongoing basis?
It's surprisingly easy. I am not. I come from a Dataverse side and write Power BI reports against that.
Okay.
I'm not an Azure expert. I'm really not even not a data lake expert or any of these other things. But the instructions was like one page. I followed the instructions. You just basically have to have an Azure subscription so that you can set up your lake. There's one checkbox you have to remember to hit in the instructions says. Select hierarchical namespace and enable hierarchical namespace. That's the only thing outside the defaults that you have to choose. It creates an empty lake that's sitting there. Give it a name that you're going to remember because you're going to live with that name for a long time. Then you build your Azure Synapse workspace. It's empty. You don't have to do anything to it. It's sitting out there. Then you take the names of those two things, go into the data lake, into Dataverse, and would you like to see what it looks like? I'll be happy to show it to you.
I'd love to see that. That'd be great.
Let me pull this up and show you where I am. I really hadn't thought about this, but it'd be easy to just kind of share this and give you an idea of what it looks like. So let's start with this. This is just a slide that I use a lot to show, we have over here the Synapse link from Dataverse, which is then writing down into the data lake. And from the data lake, we take the data plus some metadata from Dataverse and create some views in front of that. That's what goes inside of Synapse. Synapse doesn't have any of the raw data. All that's sitting in data lake, but Synapse puts it into a view and makes it easy to consume. Like if I want to write a SQL query against that, which I can then feed into Power BI. So that's kind of the view of what that looks like. And there's plenty of good documentation on top of it. Let me show you this is my Titanic environment. I use this thing all the time. This is my just demo environment of the passengers and crew of Titanic. By the way, this is a Power App, which you're probably familiar with already. And if I look inside of it, I've got data about the different people on the Titanic. Like there's Anthony, and he was a third-class passenger, got on the boat at Southampton, et cetera. You know, the basic data set that a lot of people have used this data set. And I can look at that. I'll come back to this. I got something else to show you that's pretty cool here in a minute, Chris, but I'll come back to it. But let me show you this.
Step on the lead there, I think. But okay, keep going. Yeah.
In this case now, I'm into the Maker preview, the Maker app. This is the configuration for Dataverse, if you want to call it that. And I'm using it's the same environment. This is just that admin layer.
Okay.
If I go over to Dataverse, drop down to Synapse link, pull that up. It allows me to create a new link. And all I would have to do if I was going to create a new one is select the subscription, the resource group that I want to use. Like in this case, it's on my Titanic, and it recognizes the data, the workspace, and the storage. I hit next. The next thing it's going to do is ask me to add which tables do I want to include in that. Now, I've already got this one set up, so I'm going to hit cancel there, but I'll show you what it looks like from the table standpoint. This is the next step in that process. Is I say, here are all the tables, and I've chosen the tables I want to include, and those are just the tables that it syncs. It doesn't sync anything that I'm not interested in. There's a lot of tables that are in here that I frankly don't need for the reports I was writing, but I pulled these over, hit save, and then you can see once I've hit save, they start syncing over here, and as they sync, they're moving over as changes take place. They're updating this, and you've got to count. Again, this is a sample data set that's very small, so this is probably overkill. This is definitely overkill for the basically 2,500 records. It's way overkill for that. But as an example, what we can do, and then I can start seeing these as changes take place. The synchronization moves that data over. One thing I should point out is when I go to the Manage Tables area, and I can just select the account table and hit Next, and it's going to set that up, and it's going to set it up in an overwrite mode so that as I make a change to an account record, it's going to overwrite the corresponding record in the lake with the new data.
Okay.
But I have the option, if I go to Advanced, I can hit Show Advanced Settings. You'll see now I have this option to hit the append only mode, which means that I now start getting, as I make a change to the account, it marks the previous record as inactive, and it puts a new record in, says this is the active record, and the new record has all the new data in it. So think about the opportunities you have for, like, if you're looking at a sales engagement where we're seeing sales opportunities that change over time. And a salesperson might say, hey, this is $1 million opportunity during the first of the month where everything's happy and great. But as it gets closer and closer to the end of the month, they might go, it might not be quite $1 million. It's only about 100,000, and we'll ratchet it down here. And so, but you can start seeing those trends, or they might get closer to the end of the month and they just said, it's going to be next month. And then you kind of push it out. So you can start seeing the trending of slippage that takes place in a sales engagement, or if you want to see the tracking of how a customer service opportunity moves around an organization, or how does it slip into whose queue does it sit in for a long time, or why was it spending a lot of time doing nothing in one particular group's, when it was in one particular group's hands. I've done implementations where we looked a lot of that at that data to try to understand what is moving this record through the system, through the business application system, what's moving it through, and what do we need to know about that process as it goes. But this, I wish I'd had access to this. I didn't have access to that at this time. I built all kinds of crazy snapshotting work that I did at that point, but this makes it available to us, and so it's cool. And from here, I can just click and go to the workspace. I've got a hyperlink from there to my workspace, and log in. And if you're familiar with Azure Synapse, you'll see I've got over here my lake database that has the data coming from Titanic, and there's the columns the tables that I've synchronized over, as well as some metadata tables like option set labels, etc., that are there.
Okay,
That
so
makes it available.
I have two questions for you.
Yeah,
And hopefully they'll piggyback on each other.
All right.
So on the DES solution, when you configure a table, this configuration looks nearly identical to the DES configuration. So people are familiar with doing that configuration on the data extract server. It's going to be the same thing. Is that right?
Yeah. Very much the same concept. I mean, the clicks might be slightly different, but it's the same idea.
Okay.
The difference is with DES, you have to go through a lot more steps to set up things like the key vaults or the Azure Key Vault, and setting up users and giving permissions to users, application users between the two systems. In this case, you don't have to do any of that. It's all taken care of for you. So it's dramatically simpler than setting up DES.
Okay, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
When you configure a table in DES, if there's a change to that table, right? They add a new column, they remove a column, whatever. You always had to go back in and like unsync and then resync. Do you have to do that same thing inside of here, or does it pick up the changes automatically? Like if a new
much more
column's
robust.
Added, what's that?
Much more robust. You can add columns, you can remove columns. I would say the only thing I can think of that might give you a problem is if you had a column that was a particular custom column with a certain name, and you deleted that column and then you added back another column with exactly the same name but a different data type, you probably are going to get into some wonkiness there. You might have to turn off the sync for that table and turn it back on.
Okay.
But it's pretty simple to do that. I haven't actually tried that, but that's kind of the only thing I can think of that might give you a little bit of wonkiness there.
Right. There's always
if you're
ways
actually
to break
changing
things,
Yeah. That's right. I'm always going to try to do that right off the bat.
Okay.
But,
awesome.
But it's good. It's a good system. One of the things I wanted to point out is this baked into Dataverse now is this idea of the visualize a view. Dataverse has some built-in reports, some dashboards. Let me show you an example of some that are they're very basic. They're very simple. Let's see if we can go to another one. Yeah, it's probably there's not really much in this data set other than my Titanic data, but they've got some very basic reports that are built into it. Nothing like having a nice Power BI report that you can show off. But it used to be either you built it out of Power BI and imported it into Dataverse so that you could display it there, or you didn't. So it's like it's all you could do. You had those choices. But now one of the things that's been added to the process is the idea of a quick report. And you've probably seen this also in SharePoint lists. You're seeing that now.
Yeah.
But the tool is the same idea. So if I go to a passenger list, and we'll see the list of passengers in here. Let's wake it back up. Take a look here. I think Teams is drag me down a little bit here. But in this case, now I can see a dynamically created report that sits on top of the view that I have in front of me. I just click visualize this view. It'll go through and says, "Okay, what data is in the view? What are the columns?" And let me put in front of it some ideas of which views you might be interested in seeing, or which views you might see. What kind of features you might want to see. This is coming in now. We're seeing this. It's not going to be the same as building a custom report, but it's a quick report that you can then ultimately save out and modify if you wish. But I hope to see more users go, like that quick report. That was kind of cool, but I really want to do these other few things. And so if you're a Power BI expert in the organization,
I think you froze right as you were clicking to get us to that screen.
Okay.
So
Let's see if
I think we missed some of the magic there.
Well, it was magical. Let's see if we've let's see if we can come back. So let me just close that. Let me just kill my screen for a minute. We'll just chat here.
You have gone. I think we might. Are you still there? Uh-oh, some technical difficulties here. I'm going to admit, I knew what Scott was going to show. They've now built in the ability to just automatically generate, it's coming soon, I think is what we're seeing a preview there, is the ability to automatically generate and create a Power BI report off of a Dataverse table, which is kind of exciting, right? So that, you give that ability to visualize that data that people are interacting with kind of by default. So, lots of, what the heck?
Am I back?
Oh, I can hear you, Scott. I can't see you.
Well, it's probably better off that way.
Okay.
I'll just chat with you.
Oh, here we go. I think you're coming back now. Great.
Maybe it's waking back up. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
I got a little click happy.
Always some that's the fun of a live stream, right? Like
that's right.
We were just saying, like, it's great that you're bringing the ability to automatically visualize stuff and start to build out and enhance people's ability to think about data in a non-row by row, record by record basis, right? And
spot on.
Because I think of, like, how do we build out a data culture? It's by giving people access to tools like this, right? And that's really exciting. So,
Chris, you're spot on. There's a superpower that you and everyone on the stream that's listening and comes from that analytics perspective. There's a superpower that you have that so many other people in the organization need, and maybe they don't often even know that they need it until you can show them an example of, hey, by the way, this data you're working on, wouldn't you like to see it summarized or visualize the change over month, or what is use some regression analysis, say what are the things that drive the impact on that. So as a data god yourself, I know that you and I have talked before, and you've brought that kind of insight into the organization you work with to say, hey, let me unlock this thing for you. And once people get a hold of that, it's so much fun to watch them and get excited about, oh, that's what we can do. So some of that visualizes view is kind of a little toe in the water, saying, hey, here's some summary. We can go beyond that. We can build up something pretty magical for you.
Yeah, and I call it, like, making it look fabulous, right? Like, that is something that, we need more people to out there doing. We need to, like, visualize it, and show people how you can tell stories with this stuff and take action.
Right.
And bringing that visual appeal can really change the way people are interacting and working with their reports, right? And it takes is just a little bit of color, a little bit of form, a little bit of pizzazz to really bring that in. And that's why I think those things are important to do and to add that stuff in.
You're dead on. You're so right.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much just adding a little bit of flair can unlock people's imagination and excite them on that.
Yeah.
Chris, one of the challenges that if somebody is sitting on the stream and they're saying, hey, I'm interested in this, I'd like to know more about it, or maybe I've tried it and the first version was rough, probably happens, right?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Your
through?
video is breaking up, but we can hear you just fine.
Kind of got that max headroom effect going on.
You're chunky.
So, but one of the things, if you're moving into this, one of the things I'll kind of make you aware of is that Dataverse is a relational model database.
Yep.
There are relationships and ties between tables that are all over the place. One of the mistakes that people will do, especially people coming from Dataverse to Power BI, the mistake and the easy mistake is to try to replicate Power BI's Dataverse's model into Power BI.
Okay.
That's as opposed to moving it over, restructuring it as a star schema. There's so much value that you lose if you try to take a relational model and stuff it into Power BI. The relational model, you're going to write a lot more DAX than you need to.
Right.
As opposed to bringing over and creating a star schema. It's a little challenging.
Oh, and and that's a great point, but that's something that Synapse Live link would really help us with. Right now we have those tools to be able to have that live data coming in, but then also have an end state that we're pushing that information into that is that modeled star schema, right? Like,
yeah, whether you're pushing it in through Synapse link or just pulling it in through into Power BI directly over Dataverse. Either case, that star schema really is that discipline of moving it to a star schema will make the model much easier to deal with and faster and performant and all that kind of good stuff.
And we'll get out the old star schema book. If you are not familiar, do check this out. Scott is 100% right. If you aren't putting in a star schema, performance will suffer, especially if you're in a large organization, right? And I think that's something that a lot of people might miss, or they try out for a small section of their organization and they're like, hey, this works great for my team. Why is this failing so badly when I roll this out, to my department or division, right?
Wow. I have to admit, Chris, I was a late convert to the star schema.
Yeah.
I saw in Dataverse, I've got tables and columns and relationships, and I look over in Power BI and I see tables and columns and relationships, and I think, well, let me use lift and shift.
Right.
And that approach does not work in the, you can build a first few things and you get things to light up and you make them pretty, and then you go, oh, but what if I want to add this, or what if I want to do a little bit more? And you go, oh man, I have created a mess for myself.
Right.
So there's a process there.
Well, and I think that speaks to like the difference between, and this goes back a long ways, right? Online or transaction processing, TP versus OLAP, right? Online analytical processing. Yeah. Different use cases, different engines, different models in order to produce those same results, right? And
exactly right.
That's not going to change because we added Power BI or we added something in, or Synapse Link doesn't suddenly change that fundamental nature of data, right?
Yeah, you're totally right. Totally right.
Yeah, because we're not talking a transaction, right? Like your application, you pull up Dynamics on any screen, it's showing 10 lines of data, maybe, right? Like it's just it's all in a record. It presents it, it's painted on the screen, and that's exciting. When you look at Power BI, though, you're often trolling through. I've trolled through billions of records, and I need to do that inside of a second, right? And so. Understanding that is a bit of a challenge. For people who come to you, Scott, and say that they're having problems, going out of the CRM world and getting into Power BI and taking those first steps into the star schema, what tips or what guidance would you give them to make that journey easier on them?
Yeah, I'd say the the thing that I usually do is I'll point to some of the documentation on the Power BI cat team, the cat team's guidance documentation. There's some excellent documents on why star schema, or how to think about a star schema. Again, you have to be sort of convinced that you have to believe in it in order to get started using it. If you don't believe that the star schema is necessary, you'll kind of ignore it or think, well, that's just for somebody else or for some other use case. So there's a little bit of convincing or a little bit of evangelism that has to go on to get that place. But I guess the guidance that I would say is to start with, let's define what the fact table is. Yep. Let's define what that fact table is. Then let's define what do we want to report off of that fact table. How do we want to define that fact? What kind of summarizations or patterns or anything like that. And then let's move out into the dimensions and just be very disciplined and methodical about it. Mm-hmm. Again, I mean, and I'm preaching, this is me. I want to just jump in and just throw everything at the fridge and see what sticks, and I'll figure it all out. And, we'll just go head first into that. And that just creates problems for you. Create problems for yourself as opposed to staying simple and working your way up from that process. So, yeah, it's I would go to the Power BI Cat documentation site. We've got some guidance and some best practices in there. I've also got a document that is, I'll be happy to share it I'll put it in. I'll send you a link to it. It's on my GitHub, and I'll be happy to share that with you. It's kind of my best practices document that goes through, here's what I've tried, and here's how it works, and here's how you think about these different, use case scalability. Happy to share that with you. It's just a Word document that I've got that's generally pieces that I've captured. Most of it I've actually turned into posts on my LinkedIn page. But generally, if you want to grab that, it's available. It's currently in process of being added to the doc site. One of my colleagues is rewriting portions and putting it in markup language so it will fit on the doc site correctly. Sure. But that's an in-process thing that's going on. But in the meantime, I'm happy to share it with you. It's nothing proprietary. Just do it the way I did it the second time, not the way I did it the first time.
Well, yeah. Anytime we can learn from others' mistakes is right. Beneficial, right?
I went there so you don't have to.
Thank you. Yeah. And Fernando in the chat brought up a good point around the Power BI Power App data flows. Can you talk about how that works and some good practices and on that side?
Yeah, so data flows are pretty interesting because they allow you to pull the data through and without landing it somewhere. I would say that's a really neat way to build a sort of a semantic layer, pull it out, and have it visualized for you. It's going to have the same limitations as the data, like the import mode that I mentioned, the first one, and the direct query mode that I mentioned. In terms of the size of data that those queries will be able to pull through. Okay. So those queries are still going against that same endpoint. So those queries are still going to be have the same boundaries in terms of size. If you need, and hey, if you've got an environment where, like my internal teams group, I think we've got about 30,000 records in it that we would report off of. We got a bunch of dimensions off of that, but we have 30,000 records that we're going to report off of. We can run direct query off that thing, no problem. Okay. But if instead we had, and we could use a data flow if we wanted to, but if instead we said, hey, this thing is going to be scaling up beyond dev and test into production. When we get to production, we're going to have a lot more data in here. Yeah. Then you probably want to be ready to scale up to jump over and follow the Synapse side of it.
Oh, that's
really going to depend on what size group, what size organization, how you're using the data, what do you need to do with it. So again, one size doesn't fit all.
Right. What works for, or what works for a global, enterprise is, or what they have to do is not going to be the same thing that a 500 person company has to do, right? Or a smaller org, right?
And Chris, I probably would even say that I've seen some organizations with 10 or 20 people that create massive amounts of data.
Yeah.
Because they're doing imports and they're pulling in like transactions off the IoT devices. They're creating massively large data sets. And so it's not exactly the number of people, it's really the volume of data that you're trying to pull off the database at any given time.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and kicking myself because I'm always talking about, like what's the size of the data and not necessarily what are the records, right? Like I can have 80 billion records and have it be insanely slim, right? It's all integers, right? Like it is just, it's incredible. I can also have 10,000 records that are, 500 columns wide, inclusive of, nvarchar 10,000 fields that just bomb your system out. So that is a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. There's also inside of Dataverse, you're seeing because it has a bias towards people's input on like rec comments and description fields and long text fields, and that's that just is right in Dataverse's wheelhouse to deal with. It's perfectly great data in there, but from an analytic perspective, you're really not looking at long strings of data unless you're moving it out to run sentiment analysis on top of it or something like that. You're really looking for facts and numbers and amounts and counts and things like that, in categories and values that you want to summarize it by. So that's another point. Just to your point, it's another thing to think about in terms of what do you pull out into your data set that goes into Power BI.
Sure.
Yeah.
But that also plays into like the good architectural design of having Synapse Link, where everything goes into the lake, where you can do all of that sentiment analysis against the lake, and then have your analytics just sitting on top of that, pulling that slim information in so you can get those trends, you can find those insights, and you can find those action points.
And you can say you did a better job of saying sentiment analysis. I can't say it. So it usually winds up being sentiment analysis.
Sentiment.
But, you did. So no, that's a great point.
Oh, yeah, awesome, man. Well, honestly, there is so much we could go into and we could talk about here, but Scott, I am exceedingly grateful that you took your time out of your day to come on and share this stuff with us, run through how we can leverage Dataverse, how we can leverage Synapse Link, and we can bring it into Power BI, we can bring it into all of our Azure subscriptions, we can just use it all sorts of different ways, and I thank you, Scott, for showing this stuff. So
thanks for the invite. Thank you for the invite. It's fun catching up with you, Chris, and thanks for all the work that you've done to help cross-educate people in the community. It's really fun to hear different people give their because you come from an industry background where you've got everyday real world industrial experience, and that's so valuable for other people to be able to hear from you as to what you're doing. And so thanks for what you do for the community.
Well, this is my pleasure. I like this better than video games, apparently, which is weird, but that's fine, right? So, Scott, thank you. Thank you, everyone who has tuned in and joined us for this conversation. Again, a reminder: next week, 5:00. Tuesdays, I'm going to be meeting with Gopi from InfoRiver. We're going to be running through the fastest way to do editing data inside of Power BI. I can't wait to see that. So, Scott, you're going to have to, block off your calendar, turn on that alarm bell, forward it to all your friends and family and stuff. All right?
There you go.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. Oh my gosh, where did okay. We'll see you guys later. Take care. Bye-bye.